I was folding baby clothes I never got to use when the truth found me. Not through a confession, not through a fight, but through a calendar reminder that wasn't meant for my eyes. Dinner. Claire, 7:30 p.m. My fingers froze. The tiny white onesie slipped from my hands and fell to the floor, landing softly, the way all my hopes always did. I stared at it for a long time. Strangely, my heart didn't race. It didn't pound. It sank. Because deep down in a place I had been afraid to visit, I already knew something was wrong. What I didn't know yet was this: the lie I had been blaming myself for was about to destroy everything my husband thought he controlled. Welcome, my beautiful family, to Tender Heart Stories, a place where stories don't just entertain, but teach, heal, and inspire. Before we go further, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. And if stories like this touch your heart, please subscribe, so you never miss the next lesson wrapped in a powerful story. Now, get comfortable. This one is personal. My name is Evelyn Harper, and for most of my life people described me as soft-spoken, soft-hearted, easy to love. I used to think that was a compliment. I met my husband Richard when I was 28, at a time when I believed love didn't need fireworks to be real. He wasn't charming in a loud way. He didn't overwhelm me with romance. Instead, he made me feel chosen. He had a steady career in finance, ambition in his eyes, and a way of talking about the future as if it were already written. I remember one afternoon vividly. We were walking through a quiet neighborhood lined with large houses and trimmed hedges. He squeezed my hand and said, "By the time we have kids, this will be our life. When we have kids." Those words wrapped around my heart like a promise. We married 2 years later. White roses, soft music, smiles that lasted just long enough for photographs. I stood across from him in that dress, believing I was safe. I didn't know then that safety built on silence eventually collapses. The first year of marriage was calm, not passionate, not dramatic, just steady. Richard worked long hours. I adjusted my schedule so dinner was warm when he came home. We talked about children casually at first, names we liked, schools we preferred, how many we might have. But by the second year, casual talk became plans. And by the third year, plans became pressure. At first, I wasn't afraid. I trusted my body, trusted time. But months passed, then a year, then another. Each negative test felt like a quiet rejection. I tried to stay hopeful, tried to laugh it off. Richard changed slowly. Not in obvious ways, subtle ones. He stopped holding my hand in public, stopped joking about our future kids. And one night, after I had cried quietly in the bathroom so he wouldn't adhere, he said something that would live in my mind for years. "Maybe you're trying too hard," he said. "Stress can do things to a woman's body." A woman's body. From that moment on, every problem had a direction. Every question pointed at me. Doctor appointments became lonely. Richard always had a meeting, a call, a reason. When a doctor suggested fertility testing for both of us, Richard laughed. "Let's not overreact," he said. "Evelyn just needs to relax." Relax. As if longing were a switch. As if heartbreak followed instructions. So, I apologized. For my sadness. For my silence. For my body. And Richard let me. That was the cruelest part. He let me carry a weight that was never mine. Years passed like this. I smiled through baby showers, congratulated friends on pregnancies, went home and screamed into pillows. My self-esteem didn't disappear overnight. It eroded. Quietly. I stopped wearing bright colors, stopped meeting my reflection's eyes in the mirror. And all the while, Richard rose. Promotion after promotion. New suits, new confidence, new distance. When he finally became CEO of a mid-sized investment firm, people congratulated me as if his success were our shared victory. But success doesn't just elevate some people. It exposes them. Richard started coming home later, answering calls in other rooms, guarding his phone like it carried secrets it did. When I asked questions, I was met with sighs. "Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under?" Pressure. That word again. As if my pain were an inconvenience. As if my longing were selfish. Then came Claire. Young, efficient, ambitious. Richard hired her as his executive secretary. At first I thought nothing of it. Trust had become a habit for me. A reflex, but trust without truth is fragile. Claire's name started appearing in conversations. Claire handled it. Claire reminded me. Claire thinks this will work. Her name slipped into his life with ease. And I noticed something else. Richard smiled when he said it. Still, I blamed myself. I always did. If I were enough, if I could give him what he wanted, if my body weren't broken. That night, folding baby clothes I kept hidden in the back of a drawer, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. The reminder on the tablet glowed quietly in the dim room. Dinner. A heart emoji. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my thoughts slow but deliberate. This wasn't proof, but it was a crack. And sometimes, a crack is all the truth needs. Downstairs, the front door opened. Richard was home. I closed the drawer, picked up the onesie and folded it neatly, one last time, before placing it back where it belonged. I took a deep breath, smoothed my face, and walked downstairs to greet the man who had taught me to doubt myself. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of the end. I used to believe love made people softer, kinder, more patient, more willing to listen. What I didn't know then was that love, when mixed with power and silence, can make a woman disappear right in front of herself. After that night, the night I saw the reminder, I didn't confront Richard, not because I was afraid, but because doubt had trained me well. I told myself I was overthinking, that successful men had dinners all the time, that assistants needed attention. I told myself 1,000 stories so I wouldn't have to face the one that hurt the most. And Richard noticed the change in me immediately. He always did, not because he cared, but because my silence inconvenienced him. Is something wrong? He asked one evening, loosening his tie as he walked past me. His voice sounded bored. I shook my head. No, just tired. That answer satisfied him. Because tired women don't ask questions. Tired women don't demand truth. Tired women apologize for breathing too loudly. That became me. I started waking up earlier so I wouldn't disturb him. Started cooking meals I barely tasted. Started shrinking myself into the corners of my own life. And the strange thing was, no one noticed. Friends still called me lucky. Family still said I was blessed. People envied my marriage from the outside. They didn't see the way Richard spoke to me now. Short sentences, corrective tones, a constant air of disappointment. If I forgot something, it was because I was distracted. If I asked a question, it was because I was insecure. If I cried, it was because I was emotional. Everything I did had a flaw attached to it. Slowly, I began to believe him. I started therapy on my own. Richard said it was a good idea, not because he cared about my healing, but because it confirmed his narrative. She's sensitive, he told people. She puts too much pressure on herself. And I nodded along, smiling weakly, as if I agreed. At night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I stopped being a wife and became a burden. He smelled different now. Cologne I didn't recognize. Confidence that didn't belong to us. Sometimes, when his phone buzzed late at night, he'd roll away from me and whisper. I stopped asking who it was, because every time I did, he'd sigh deeply and say, Evelyn, not everything is about you. Those words carved themselves into me. Not everything is about you. So, I made everything smaller. My needs, my voice, my presence. I stopped initiating intimacy. Stopped reaching for him in bed, stopped dreaming out loud, and he didn't notice. Or worse, he noticed and enjoyed it. Claire started coming up more often, not directly, but indirectly. She's efficient, he'd say. She understands how I work. I told myself not to read into it, But one evening, during a work event, I finally met her. She was younger than I expected, beautiful in a sharp, intentional way. The kind of beauty that knows it has power. She shook my hand firmly, looked me straight in the eyes, and smiled. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. It was assessing. Like she was measuring something. I noticed the way Richard stood closer to her than he did to me, not touching, but aligned, as if they shared a rhythm I wasn't part of. When I spoke, Claire nodded politely. When Richard spoke, she leaned in. I told myself I was imagining things. I always did. On the drive home, Richard talked about work. Didn't ask how I felt. Didn't ask what I thought. Just spoke. I stared out the window and watched streetlights blur past. For the first time in years, a quiet thought surfaced in my mind. What if I'm not imagining this? The thought scared me more than the possibility of betrayal. Because imagining meant I was still in control. Truth meant I wasn't. Weeks passed. Then, months. And my body started responding to the stress in ways I couldn't hide. I stopped sleeping through the night. Food tasted like nothing. My reflection looked older, thinner, hollower. One afternoon, during another doctor's appointment Richard didn't attend, the nurse asked gently, "Are you under a lot of stress?" I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. She touched my arm. And just like that, I started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of crying that feels like a leak you can't fix. I told her everything, or at least, everything I thought was wrong with me. She listened. Then she said something that stopped me cold. "Has your husband been tested?" I shook my head. "He doesn't think it's necessary." She didn't say anything else, but the silence spoke volumes. I drove home in a fog. When I suggested testing again that night, Richard's reaction was immediate. Angry, offended. "How dare you suggest that?" He snapped. "My doctor says I'm perfectly healthy." I hadn't mentioned his health, just testing. But the defensiveness told me something my heart wasn't ready to accept. That night, he slept facing away from me. The space between us felt deliberate, punitive, as if I'd crossed a line. I spent the next few days apologizing, for pushing, for questioning, for upsetting him. He accepted my apologies the way kings accept offerings, without gratitude, without warmth. And that's when I realized something painful. I was no longer his partner. I was his liability. Meanwhile, his life kept expanding. New contacts, new trips, new dinners. He started coming home smelling like wine and confidence. Once, when I asked where he'd been, he replied casually, "Out with Claire and a client." My heart skipped, but I nodded, smiled, pretended my chest wasn't tight. That night, I stood in the shower longer than usual, letting the water burn my skin, hoping it would wash away the feeling of being unwanted in my own marriage. I prayed, not for a baby, but for clarity. I didn't get it. What I got instead was silence. And silence, I would soon learn, is the most dangerous place a woman can live. Because when no one tells you the truth, you start believing the lie. There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't throw things. It doesn't beg for attention. It sits quietly inside you and whispers the same question over and over again. What's wrong with me? That question became my constant companion. It followed me into the kitchen when I made breakfast for a man who barely looked at me anymore. It followed me into bed at night, where I lay inches from my husband yet felt oceans away. It followed me into mirrors, where my reflection slowly began to look like someone I didn't recognize. I stopped trusting my body, not just because it wouldn't give me a child, but because it felt like it was betraying me in every other way too. I woke up exhausted no matter how much I slept. My hands shook sometimes for no reason. My heart raced when the phone rang, especially late at night. And the worst part was this: I started apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. For asking questions, for wanting reassurance, for existing too loudly. Richard noticed. Of course he did. Men like him always notice when a woman starts shrinking. They don't stop it. They benefit from it. "You're overthinking again," he'd say whenever I tried to talk. Not angrily, not cruelly, just dismissively, as if my thoughts were a child tugging at his sleeve while he did something more important. Maybe if you stopped stressing so much, things would happen naturally. Naturally. That word felt like a slap, as if I hadn't tried everything, as if I hadn't rearranged my entire life around hope. I started tracking my cycle obsessively. Temperature charts, apps, ovulation kits. I read forums late into the night, scrolling through stories of women who eventually succeeded. I clung to their hope like it was oxygen. Richard never asked about any of it, never asked how I was feeling, never held me when the disappointment hit again. He treated my pain like a background noise he'd grown accustomed to ignoring. Once, after another negative test, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried until my throat hurt. I didn't scream. I didn't sob dramatically. I cried quietly, carefully. Because even alone, I was afraid of being too much. When I finally emerged, my eyes red and swollen, Richard glanced at me briefly and said, "You should really talk to someone about this." I stared at him. "You mean us?" He shook his head. "No, you." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. Like a hairline fracture you don't notice until you put weight on it. I started therapy soon after. Alone. Every week, I sat on a couch across from a woman who looked at me with concern and asked gentle questions. How do you feel when your husband says that? Do you feel supported? When was the last time you felt safe expressing your emotions? I didn't know how to answer, because the truth sounded dramatic even to my own ears. And I had learned that dramatic women were dismissed, so I softened everything. I minimized. I defended him. He's just stressed. He doesn't mean it that way. He's a good man. The therapist listened quietly. Then one day, she said something that unsettled me deeply. "It sounds like you're carrying all the blame in this relationship." I laughed. A quick, nervous sound. "Well, someone has to." She didn't laugh back. That silence lingered. At home, things worsened. Richard stopped pretending. He criticized the way I cooked, the way I dressed, the way I spoke in front of his colleagues. "You make things awkward," he told me once after a dinner party. "I was just being myself," I said quietly. He sighed. "Exactly." That word lodged itself in my chest. Exactly. As if who I was had become the problem. He started sleeping later. Claimed exhaustion. Claimed work. Claimed everything except the truth. Sometimes, he wouldn't come home at all. No explanation, no apology. Just a text hours later. "Working late. Don't wait up." And I wouldn't. I'd sit alone in the dark, replaying every conversation, every look, every moment I might have failed him. I blamed my body most of all. I hated it. Hated the way it refused to do the one thing it was supposed to do. Hated the way it betrayed me month after month. Hated the way it made me feel unworthy. I stopped touching my stomach. Stopped wearing fitted clothes. Stopped feeling feminine. Sex became rare. And when it happened, it felt mechanical. Disconnected. Like something we did out of obligation, not desire. Once, after we finished, Richard rolled away immediately. Didn't touch me. Didn't speak. I stared at his back and felt an overwhelming urge to disappear. Not die. Just vanish. So he wouldn't have to deal with me anymore. I started avoiding social gatherings. Baby showers were unbearable. I made excuses. Claimed migraines. Claimed work. Claimed illness. People stopped inviting me eventually. I don't blame them. Pain makes people uncomfortable. Richard's family was worse. His mother would glance at me with thinly veiled disappointment. "We were hoping for grandchildren by now," she said once, as if commenting on the weather. I smiled, apologized, as if I'd failed an assignment. Richard didn't defend me. Not once. On the drive home, I asked him why. He shrugged. She didn't mean anything by it. I looked out the window and swallowed the lump in my throat. Of course she didn't. Only I ever meant anything by it. I started questioning my worth beyond motherhood. Was I interesting enough? Attractive enough? Successful enough? The answers felt unclear. My career stalled because I had built my life around his. My friendships faded because I didn't have the energy to maintain them. My confidence evaporated because it had nowhere to rest. And through it all, Claire's name floated quietly in the background. Never loud enough to confront, always present enough to haunt. "She's great at her job," Richard said one evening, scrolling through his phone. "She really understands me." Something in his tone made my chest ache. I wanted to ask what that meant, but I didn't, because I already knew the answer. One night, I finally gathered the courage to ask him directly if he was happy. He paused, just for a second, then said, "I don't know." That pause told me everything. I asked if he still loved me. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he said something worse. "I think you put too much of your identity into this whole baby thing." I stared at him. "You mean the thing you said you wanted to?" He sighed. "There you go again, turning everything into an emotional conversation." That night, I cried myself to sleep while he snored beside me. The loneliness was unbearable. Being alone would have hurt less. At least then, I wouldn't have felt rejected every day by someone who vowed to love me. The breaking point came during another doctor's visit. This time, the doctor was firmer. "We've run extensive tests on you," she said gently. "Everything looks normal." Normal. The word felt unreal. "So, what does that mean?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "It means we should strongly recommend testing your husband." I nodded. My hands trembled. That night, I brought it up carefully. I chose my words like landmines. "I think maybe it's time we both get tested." Richard's reaction was explosive. "How many times are we going to go over this?" He snapped. "I'm not the problem, Evelyn." The certainty in his voice stunned me. "You don't know that," I said quietly. He stood up, towered over me. "I know my body," he said. "And I'm not going to let you project your issues onto me." I felt myself shrinking again. "I'm not projecting," I whispered. "Yes, you are," he said sharply. "You're insecure, you're unhappy, and instead of dealing with that, you want to drag me into it." Tears blurred my vision. "I just want us to face this together." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "There is no us in this problem." That sentence broke something deep inside me. I stopped arguing, stopped pushing, stopped hoping. I apologized. Again. For questioning him, for upsetting him, for being difficult. He accepted my apology without hesitation, and I went to bed feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. That night, I placed my hand on my stomach and whispered an apology to it. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry I hate you." I didn't realize then that my body wasn't failing me. It was warning me that I was carrying a burden that didn't belong to me, that the real sickness in my life wasn't infertility. It was a man who needed me broken so he could feel whole. And I would learn soon enough. Some truths don't come gently. They arrive like fire. There is a moment, quiet and almost unnoticeable, when suspicion stops being a thought and starts becoming a feeling. Not a clear one, not one you can explain. Just a tightening in your chest when a certain name is mentioned. A heaviness when a certain room goes quiet. A coldness when you realize you're no longer imagining things. That was how Claire entered my life. Not dramatically, not with an announcement, but with a presence that slowly pushed me out of my own marriage. At first, she was just a name. Then she became a voice on speakerphone. Then a laugh I heard through closed doors. Then a comparison I never asked for. Richard talked about her constantly, not in ways that were obviously inappropriate. That's what made it worse. "She's incredibly organized. She anticipates my needs. She just gets how my mind works." Each compliment landed somewhere deep inside me, carving out a space where my confidence used to live. I tried to be mature about it. Tried to remind myself that assistants were supposed to be helpful. But there was something about the way he said her name. With ease. With admiration. With a warmth he hadn't used on me in years. The first time I met her properly was at one of Richard's company events. A fundraiser. elegant venue. Soft lighting. Men in tailored suits. Women in dresses that whispered money. I remember standing beside Richard, my hand resting lightly on his arm, feeling more like an accessory than a wife. That's when Claire approached us. She was stunning, not in a loud, flashy way. In a controlled, intentional way. Perfect posture. Sharp eyes. A smile that appeared practiced. "Mr. Harper?" she said warmly. Then she turned to me. "And you must be Evelyn." Her voice was smooth. Confident. She reached out to shake my hand, gripping just a second longer than necessary. Her eyes scanned me. Not rudely, carefully, like she was taking inventory. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said. I smiled. Likewise. But something about her smile unsettled me. It was too polished. Too steady. The kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Throughout the evening, I noticed the way she hovered near Richard. Always available. Always attentive. She laughed at his jokes. Touched his arm lightly when she spoke. Leaned in when he talked, as if his words were precious. And Richard shone. He straightened when she approached. Lowered his voice when speaking to her. Listened. Really listened. I stood there, watching my husband become a version of himself I hadn't seen in years. A version that wasn't tired, wasn't dismissive, wasn't irritated. A version that felt alive. And I hated myself for noticing. On the drive home, I waited. Waited for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. Finally, I asked, "She seems very dedicated." He smiled. "She is. I don't know how I managed before hiring her." The words stung more than they should have. I nodded. "That's good." That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, replaying the way Claire had looked at him. Not with respect, with hunger. The realization made my stomach turn. Over the next few weeks, Claire's presence expanded. She called him outside of work hours, texted him late at night. Sometimes, I could see the glow of his phone screen lighting up his face in the dark. When I asked who it was, he'd say casually, "Work?" But work had never smiled at him like that before. I started noticing changes in our routines. Richard stayed out later, claimed more meetings, canceled plans with me last minute. Once, on our anniversary, he told me something had come up. I ate dinner alone that night. A reservation for two. One empty chair. A waiter who avoided eye contact. I told myself not to cry. But tears came anyway. When Richard finally came home, smelling like wine and unfamiliar perfume, I asked him where he'd been. "With Claire and a client," he said. Like it was nothing. Like it was normal. I felt something shift inside me. "On our anniversary?" He sighed. "You're being dramatic." That word again. Dramatic. As if expecting your husband on your anniversary was unreasonable. I stopped asking questions after that. Not because I didn't care, but because every answer hurt more than silence. One afternoon, I stopped by Richard's office unexpectedly. I told myself it was innocent. I brought him lunch, a small gesture, something wives did. Claire greeted me at the reception desk. She looked surprised, then quickly masked it with a smile. "Evelyn, what a surprise." I nodded. "I thought I'd bring Richard lunch." Her smile tightened. "Oh, he's in a meeting." I glanced past her, through the glass walls of his office. The blinds were half closed. I could see movement inside. Two silhouettes. Too close. Too intimate. My heart pounded. "Do you want me to leave it here?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "That might not be necessary." Something about her tone felt territorial, as if I were intruding in my own husband's space. I left without insisting, walked out of the building feeling foolish, small, unwelcome. That night, Richard accused me of not trusting him. "Why did you show up unannounced?" he asked. I stared at him. "I'm your wife." He scoffed. "That doesn't give you the right to invade my workspace." I apologized. Again. And something in me hated myself for it. Claire started dressing differently, not provocatively, strategically. She mirrored Richard's tastes. Muted colors, elegant cuts, nothing loud, nothing inappropriate, everything appealing. She learned his habits, his coffee order, his moods. She knew when to speak and when to stay silent. I watched her become indispensable. And I watched myself become irrelevant. One evening, Richard mentioned that Claire was going through a tough time. "She's been really stressed lately," he said. "Poor thing." The concern in his voice shocked me. He hadn't spoken about my stress like that in years. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "Personal stuff?" I nodded. But something twisted in my chest. Why did he know her personal struggles but not? Why did he care? The answer haunted me. Weeks later, I found one of her earrings in our bedroom. Small, silver, definitely not mine. I held it in my palm for a long time. My hands shook. When I confronted Richard, he didn't panic, didn't deny. He laughed. "You're losing it," he said. "She was here once to drop off documents." "In our bedroom?" I asked. "She needed my signature," he replied calmly. "You're really starting to imagine things." And just like that, doubt crept in. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was broken. Maybe infertility had made me paranoid. That's the power of gaslighting. It doesn't just confuse you, it erases your instincts. The final straw came at another company event. Claire stood beside Richard, like she belonged there. Not as an employee, but as a partner. She wore a dress that caught the light beautifully. She laughed easily, confidently. People mistook her for his wife, and he didn't correct them. I stood there, invisible, watching my marriage slip through my fingers. When I confronted him afterward, his response was ice cold. "You're embarrassing me," he said. "You're insecure. And it's exhausting." That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my body ached. I stared at my reflection. Pale, tired, unrecognizable. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think the unthinkable. He's cheating. The thought didn't break me. It clarified everything. Suddenly, the distance made sense. The cruelty, the confidence, the ease with which he dismissed me. Claire wasn't just a secretary. She was a replacement in training. And the most terrifying realization of all was this. They didn't think I would notice. They thought I was too broken, too insecure, too desperate. They thought wrong. But I wouldn't understand just how wrong until the next betrayal tore my world open completely. There are moments that don't announce themselves as endings. They don't come with warning signs or dramatic music. They arrive dressed like ordinary days, and then quietly ruin you. The day Richard told me about the pregnancy began like any other. I woke up before him as I usually did. The house was still dark, quiet in that way that makes you feel like the only person left in the world. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee machine, trying to remember the last time I'd woken up feeling hopeful. I couldn't. I moved through my morning on autopilot, poured coffee, toasted bread, swallowed a few bites I didn't taste. My phone buzzed once with a message from my sister asking how I was holding up. I didn't reply. I never knew what to say anymore. When Richard finally came downstairs, he barely looked at me. He grabbed his briefcase, checked his phone, and muttered something about a long day. I watched him leave, noticing how easy it was for him to walk out of our life, like none of it mattered. I spent the day cleaning a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. I folded laundry we no longer shared, straightened picture frames that reminded me of better years. I even cooked dinner, out of habit more than hope. By the time evening came, I felt strangely calm, numb, like my emotions had decided to abandon me before anything else could. Richard came home late, later than usual. I heard the door open, then close slowly, deliberately. He didn't call my name, didn't head for the bedroom. Instead, he stood in the living room, waiting. I turned off the stove and walked toward him. The look on his face stopped me halfway. He wasn't angry, wasn't nervous. He looked resolved. That terrified me. "We need to talk," he said. My heart began to pound, but my voice stayed steady. "Okay." We sat down across from each other, the same couch where we once planned baby names, vacations, futures, Now it felt like a courtroom. He rubbed his hands together, then said it. Claire is pregnant. For a second, I honestly thought I misheard him. The words didn't make sense. Pregnant. Claire. Those two things didn't belong together in my mind. I waited for clarification, for context, for him to explain what he meant. He didn't. And the baby is mine. That was when my body reacted. My ears rang. My chest tightened so sharply I thought I might pass out. I gripped the edge of the couch to keep myself upright. I remember thinking, this can't be real. I remember thinking, this only happens in stories. But this was my life, my husband, my marriage, my nightmare. I've been trying for years, I whispered. The words slipped out of me before I could stop them. All those nights, all those prayers, all that blame. He looked uncomfortable, not remorseful. Well, he said slowly, at least now we know the problem wasn't me. I felt something inside me snap. Not break, snap. Like a cord pulled too tight for too long. You let me believe it was my fault, I said. He shrugged. You believed it. That was when I realized something horrifying. He wasn't cruel in the heat of anger. He was cruel in calmness. This wasn't an accident. This was convenience. What happens now? I asked. He leaned back, crossing his arms. That depends. On what? On what Claire decides to do. My stomach dropped. So she decides? He didn't answer. Silence filled the room, thick, suffocating. I felt like I was shrinking right in front of him. I'm your wife, I said. He looked at me like I'd reminded him of an outdated fact. And she's carrying my child. That sentence erased me. Completely. I excused myself and went upstairs, my legs shaking so badly I had to grip the railing. In the bathroom, I locked the door and slid to the floor. I screamed into a towel. I punched the tiles until my hands hurt. I cried until my face went numb. I stared at myself in the mirror and whispered, "She gave him what you couldn't." I hated myself for thinking it. But the thought wouldn't leave. My phone buzzed. A message. From Claire. I didn't want you to find out like this. I laughed hysterically. Like any way would have been acceptable. I didn't reply. I couldn't. That night, Richard didn't come to bed. He packed a bag. Said he needed space. Space. As if space was the problem. He left me alone in a house filled with memories that now felt like accusations. The next few days blurred together. Richard moved in with her. Just like that. No discussion. No apology. No attempt to soften the blow. Friends found out. Whispers followed me everywhere. People looked at me with pity. The worst kind of attention. His mother called, not to comfort me, but to say, at least now we know he can have children. I dropped the phone and sobbed on the floor. Claire didn't hide. She became visible. Public. Bold. She posted pictures online, her hand on her stomach, Richard beside her smiling. Smiling, like I had never existed. Once, I ran into her at the grocery store. She placed a hand protectively over her belly when she saw me. Instinctively, like I was the threat. You should take care of yourself, she said softly. You look fragile. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and walked away, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys. At home, I stopped eating, stopped answering messages, stopped being human. The shame consumed me. I replayed every moment of my marriage, searching for where I failed. I believed every lie he told, that I was too emotional, too needy, too broken. I stood in front of the mirror one night and said out loud, "You were never enough." And for a moment, I believed it. That was when my therapist called. She sounded concerned. "Evelyn," she said, "something about this doesn't add up." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Sudden pregnancy. After years of infertility, refusal to test, extreme defensiveness, none of it fits. For the first time in years, someone wasn't blaming me. For the first time, someone questioned him. A small spark ignited inside me. Dangerous, hopeful, terrifying. "What should I do?" I asked. She paused. Get the truth. As I hung up, my hands trembled. Because if the truth wasn't what I'd been told, then everything was about to change. There is something deeply unsettling about the moment you stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what if I was lied to. That shift doesn't come with relief. It comes with terror. Because blaming yourself is painful, but it's familiar. Blaming someone else means admitting your pain was preventable. And that truth can destroy you. I didn't wake up the morning after my therapist's call feeling brave. I woke up feeling nauseous. My mouth was dry. My chest felt tight. My heart beat too fast, like it was preparing to run from something it hadn't seen yet. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying her words again and again. Something doesn't add up. Those 4 words echoed louder than any accusation ever had. For years, everything had added up to one conclusion. Me, my body, my failure, my inability. But now, there was a crack in that story, and cracks let light in. They also let destruction through. I sat up slowly, pressing my feet against the cold floor, grounding myself. The house was silent. Richard hadn't been home in days. His absence no longer shocked me, but it still hurt in ways I hadn't learned how to ignore. I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection. "You're not crazy," I whispered to myself. The woman staring back didn't look convinced. Her eyes were tired, her face thinner, her expression cautious, as if she had learned not to hope too loudly. I showered, dressed, and made coffee I didn't drink. Then I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a notebook. For the first time in years, I wrote things down. Not apologies, not reminders, not ways to fix myself. Facts. Richard refusing to test. Richard snapping when asked. Richard claiming certainty without proof. Richard suddenly confident after Claire's pregnancy. When I finished, my hands were shaking. Because written down like that, it didn't look like coincidence. It looked like avoidance. I picked up my phone and hovered over Richard's name. My thumb hesitated. I was about to challenge the foundation of everything he'd built. When he answered, his voice was sharp. "What?" No greeting, no concern. "We need to talk," I said. He scoffed. "About what now?" "About fertility testing." Silence. Then a laugh. Slow, mocking. "You're obsessed," he said. "You really can't let this go, can you?" "I let it go for years," I replied. "That's the problem. Why are you doing this?" He snapped. "You lost. Accept it. Lost. Like my marriage was a game." "I'm not accusing you," I said carefully. "I'm asking for facts." "You don't get to ask me for anything anymore," he said coldly. That stung. But I didn't retreat. "If you're so sure," I said, "then this shouldn't matter." His breathing changed. "You want to humiliate me," he said. "That's what this is." "No," I replied. "I want the truth." "You already have it." "No," I said. "I have your version." That was when his voice hardened. "If you push this," he warned, "you'll regret it." The threat hung in the air. "I've regretted staying silent," I said. "I won't do that anymore." He hung up. I sat there shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. I had finally said something that couldn't be taken back. The waiting that followed was torture. 2 days passed, then 3. No word from him. Instead, Claire's presence grew louder. Photos, smiles, captions about miracles and blessings. I stared at one image longer than I should have. Richard's hand resting on her stomach, possessive, proud. That hand had once rested on mine. I closed the app and threw my phone across the couch. That night, my lawyer called. "They've agreed to testing," she said. I laughed softly. "Of course they have." "Why do you say that?" she asked. "Because he thinks he's untouchable." The testing process was quiet and clinical. No drama, no emotion. Just forms, needles, sterile rooms. Still, my hands trembled as the nurse tied the band around my arm. "You're very tense," she said gently. "I've been blamed for years," I replied. "This matters." She squeezed my arm before drawing blood. Waiting for the results was worse than the testing itself. Every day felt heavy. Every night, my mind replayed conversations I hadn't questioned before. I remembered Richard laughing when I cried, rolling his eyes when I suggested doctors, speaking with authority about something he'd never confirmed. I remembered how confident he'd been when Claire announced her pregnancy. Too confident. My phone rang late one evening. "Richard," I answered. "So," he said, smug. "You done playing detective? Are you nervous?" I asked. He laughed. "Why would I be?" "Because if you're wrong," I said, "everything changes." "You're desperate," he snapped. "And desperation makes people dangerous." "No," I said quietly. "Lies do." He hung up again. The results came 2 days later. The doctor asked me to come in person. I knew then. Doctors don't do that for good news alone. When I sat across from her, she spoke slowly. "Your tests are normal," she said. I exhaled sharply. "But your husband's results." She paused. "Yes?" I whispered. "He is infertile." The room spun. "How long?" I asked. "This condition would have existed for many years," she replied. Years. All those nights. All those apologies. All those moments I begged him not to leave me. I left the office in silence. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at the table, hands folded, breathing steadily. Richard called the next morning. "Well?" He said. "What did the tests say?" "You're infertile," I replied. He laughed. "You're lying." "I'm not." "That's impossible." "It's documented." "You're trying to destroy me?" "No," I said. "I'm done letting you destroy me." His voice cracked. For the first time. "You think this changes anything?" He hissed. "Yes," I said. "It changes everything." I hung up. And for the first time since I married him, I slept peacefully. Because the truth was no longer something I feared. It was something I held. Truth doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a file sliding across a desk, like a sentence spoken too calmly, like a look someone gives you when they realize they've lost control. That was how it began, not with screaming, not with chaos, but with paperwork. After Richard hung up on me, I didn't feel victorious. I felt alert, like someone who had just stepped onto thin ice and realized the only way out was forward. My lawyer called me that afternoon. "Evelyn," she said, "we need to talk about the pregnancy." My stomach tightened. "What about it?" "There's something you should know," she continued. "Given the medical results, there is now legal justification to request a DNA test." The words hit me slowly. DNA test. Real proof. Scientific, undeniable proof. I leaned back in my chair. "Will he agree to that?" I asked. She paused. "He won't have a choice." For the first time in years, I smiled, not out of happiness, but out of certainty. Because lies don't survive light. And Richard had built his entire new life in the dark. The request was filed quietly, officially, professionally. Richard called me the moment he was notified. His voice was furious. "You've gone too far," he shouted. "I've gone far enough," I replied. "You're obsessed." He snapped. "You're trying to punish me because you lost." "No," I said calmly. "I'm trying to understand how a man who's infertile got a woman pregnant." Silence. Long. Sharp. Then he laughed. A brittle sound. "You're grasping at straws." "Then the test will clear everything up," I said. His breathing changed. I could hear it. Uneven. Fast. "Claire doesn't need this stress," he said. "She's carrying my child." "Then the truth won't hurt," I replied. He hung up without another word. Claire, however, didn't stay silent. She messaged me that night. "Claire, we need to talk. Woman to woman." I stared at the screen. Woman to woman. As if she hadn't taken everything from me. I didn't respond. Instead, she showed up. At my door. Unannounced. I froze when I saw her through the window. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach. Her expression was calm. Prepared. I opened the door. "What do you want?" I asked. She smiled faintly. I think we should clear the air. You should leave, I said. She stepped forward anyway. I know this is hard for you, she said softly. But dragging things out won't change reality. What reality? I asked. She tilted her head. Richard and I are building a family. I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. You're building a lie, I said. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then it returned. You're hurting, she said. And hurt people do irrational things. I stepped closer. Whose baby is it, Claire? Her eyes flicked away. Of course it's Richard's. I stared at her. Then the DNA test won't matter. She swallowed. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said. I leaned in. Because I spent years believing I was broken. And I'm done carrying shame that doesn't belong to me. Her voice dropped. You're making a mistake. No, I said. You did. She left without another word. The waiting that followed was unbearable. Richard went silent. Claire disappeared from social media. No more photos. No more captions. That alone told me everything. The day of the DNA test arrived. Richard didn't speak to me, didn't look at me. Claire avoided my eyes. Her hand trembled as she signed the paperwork. I noticed. I noticed everything. Days later, my lawyer called me into her office. She closed the door. Her expression was serious. We have the results, she said. My heart pounded. Well, I whispered. She slid the file across the desk. The baby is not Richard's. The words echoed. Not his. I closed my eyes. Not out of relief, out of vindication. I felt something inside me release. Years of guilt dissolving in a single sentence. What happens now? I asked. She exhaled. Now. Everything falls apart. Richard found out first. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it. He screamed, denied, accused the lab of falsifying results, demanded retesting. But truth doesn't change because someone can't accept it. Claire broke. She confessed, not out of guilt, but out of fear. The baby belonged to a man she'd been seeing before Richard. A man with no money, no status, no future she wanted. Richard had been the target. His wealth, his power, his desperation to prove himself. She thought pregnancy would secure her future. She thought wrong. Richard called me that night. His voice was unrecognizable. Cracked, desperate. This isn't over, he said. Oh, it's just beginning, I replied. You ruined my life, he hissed. You ruined your own, I said quietly. Claire tried to reach out again. This time, she cried. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. I felt nothing. You meant to use him, I said. And you meant to hurt me. She didn't deny it. Richard's reputation collapsed. At work, in his family, in his carefully curated world, people whispered again, but this time not about me. This time about him. The CEO who lied, the man who blamed his wife, the fool who got played. And as I watched his world burn, I didn't smile. I felt something better. Peace. Because the truth didn't just expose them. It freed me. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always look like rage. It doesn't always come with shouting, broken glasses, or dramatic exits. Sometimes, revenge is quiet, calculated, executed with calm hands and a steady heart. By the time Richard's lies collapsed completely, after the DNA results, after Claire's confession, after his reputation cracked, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy, and I had spent too many years exhausted. What I felt instead was focus. I didn't rush into divorce court screaming. I didn't confront him publicly. I didn't demand explanations or closure. I let the truth do what it does best. I let it rot everything he touched. My lawyer became my shield. Every conversation went through her. Every message documented. Every threat recorded. Richard didn't like that. He was used to control. Used to speaking over me. Used to watching me shrink. Now he had to speak carefully. And it enraged him. He called me one night, drunk and furious. "You think you're smart now?" He slurred. "You think you've won?" I listened quietly. "I built everything we had," he continued. "You don't get to take it from me." I waited until he finished. Then I said calmly, "I supported everything you built while you were tearing me down." He laughed bitterly. "You didn't do anything." Silence followed. Then I replied, "We'll let the court decide that." He hung up. The divorce proceedings began quietly, but ruthlessly. Discovery exposed everything. Hidden accounts, undisclosed bonuses, assets he'd assumed I'd never question. Emails where he mocked me. Messages where he referred to me as fragile and replaceable. The judge didn't find those amusing. Neither did his legal team. Richard tried to shift strategies. First, intimidation, then charm, then desperation. He sent flowers, apology letters, late-night voicemails where his voice cracked and he begged. "I made mistakes," he said in one message, "but you're ruining me." I deleted them all. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. At mediation, he finally had to sit across from me. No glass walls, no assistants, no power buffers, just us. He looked smaller, older. The confidence he once wore like armor now hung awkwardly on him. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, avoiding my eyes. I didn't respond. The mediator looked at me. "Evelyn?" I spoke calmly. "I want what's fair." Richard scoffed. "You're bleeding me dry." I met his eyes for the first time. "No," I said evenly. "I'm collecting what you took while I wasn't looking." Silence. The mediator cleared his throat. We went through assets one by one. The house, retirement accounts, investments, properties purchased during the marriage. Every time Richard protested, documentation shut him down. Every time he raised his voice, the room grew colder. I watched him realize something devastating. He couldn't bully his way out of this. When it was over, I walked out with the house, a significant financial settlement, long-term security, and something he could never reclaim: my voice. The fallout hit him fast. His board quietly asked him to step down, not officially fired, just removed. Reputation is fragile like that. Once trust cracks, it never fits the same way again. Claire disappeared completely. Last I heard, she moved away. No Richard, no baby leverage, no future she imagined. I didn't care. She had already served her purpose in my life. She showed me the truth. Richard tried one final time to regain control. He showed up at the house unannounced, standing on the porch like a ghost of a life that no longer belonged to him. "You can't just erase me," he said. I stood in the doorway, calm. "I didn't erase you," I replied. "You erased yourself." He looked around the house. "My house," he muttered. "Our house," I corrected. "And now it's mine." He laughed bitterly. "You think you've won?" I paused, then said softly, "I don't think about you enough to call this winning." That broke him. He left without another word. That night, I walked through every room of the house slowly, touching walls, opening windows, letting air move freely. For the first time, the space felt mine. Not a performance, not a prison. A home. I redecorated intentionally, removed everything that reminded me of silence. I reclaimed my name, my routines, my time. I invested, expanded my career, did things I once postponed for later. Later finally came. People started treating me differently. Not with pity, with respect. Not because of what happened to me, but because of how I handled it. And the strangest part? I felt no need to prove anything. Not to him. Not to the world. The justice wasn't loud. It was complete. Richard faded into the background of his own story, and I stepped fully into mine. People talk about freedom like it arrives all at once. Like one day you wake up and the pain is gone, the fear is gone, the memories are quiet, and life suddenly feels light again. That isn't how it happened for me. Freedom came in pieces. Small ones. fragile ones. Moments where I realized I was breathing without bracing myself for disappointment. Moments where I laughed and didn't immediately feel guilty for it. Moments where I stood still in my own house and felt safe. After the divorce was finalized, after the money was settled, after Richard's name faded from legal documents and daily conversations, there was an unexpected silence. Not the suffocating silence I used to live in, but a calm one, a neutral one, the kind that waits for you to decide what comes next. For a long time, I didn't rush to fill it. I had spent years shaping my life around someone else's moods, expectations, and ego. I wasn't about to replace that with noise. Instead, I learned how to sit with myself again. The first thing I noticed was how tired I had been. Not physically, but emotionally. I had lived in survival mode for so long that rest felt unfamiliar. So I rested. I slept in without apologizing. I ate when I was hungry, not when it was convenient for someone else. I walked through my days without constantly checking the time, wondering when I needed to be somewhere for someone else. I took my power back quietly, room by room, habit by habit. I started therapy again, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand myself without shame clouding every thought. And something incredible happened. I stopped asking, why wasn't I enough? And started asking, why did I believe I wasn't? That question changed everything. I realized how carefully the blame had been handed to me, how gently it had been placed on my shoulders until it felt like it belonged there. I had confused endurance with love, silence with peace, sacrifice with worth. And once I saw that clearly, the guilt began to dissolve. I redecorated the house slowly, not dramatically, not to erase the past, but to claim the present. I changed the lighting, let sunlight reach corners that had stayed dark for years. I replaced heavy furniture with lighter pieces. I opened windows more often. The house began to breathe again. So did I. Friends I had distanced myself from started returning, some cautiously, some apologetically. I welcomed them all. Not everyone knew how to be there for someone who was quietly breaking. I understood that now. What mattered was that I was no longer alone. My career flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant emotional drain, my focus sharpened. I took risks I'd been too afraid to take before, applied for positions I once thought were beyond me, spoke up in rooms I used to shrink in. Confidence didn't arrive loudly. It grew steadily, like a muscle that finally remembered what it was made for. Every now and then, I heard things about Richard. How he struggled to regain credibility, how people still whispered, how trust never fully returned. I felt no joy in that, no satisfaction, only distance. He was no longer a chapter I reread. He was a lesson I had learned. Claire never reached out again, and I didn't need her to. Closure doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it comes with indifference. For a long time, I didn't think about love. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't feel empty anymore. I had spent so many years believing love was something I needed to earn, protect, or maintain at my own expense. Now, love felt optional, and that realization was liberating. Then one ordinary afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was at a small bookstore, the kind that smells like paper and quiet. I was standing in the self-help section, holding a book I wasn't sure I needed, when a voice beside me said, "That one helped me forgive myself." I looked up. He wasn't extraordinary in an obvious way. No grand presence, no forced charm, just calm, warm, grounded. We talked, not about trauma, not about the past, about books, about travel, about nothing that felt heavy. His name was Daniel. He didn't push, didn't pry, didn't ask questions that felt invasive. When we exchanged numbers, it felt natural, not like a risk, not like a leap, just easy. We met for coffee, then walks, then dinners that didn't feel like performances. He listened, actually listened. When I spoke, he didn't interrupt or redirect the conversation back to himself. When I paused, he didn't rush to fill the silence. He respected it. One evening, I told him parts of my story. Not everything, just enough. I watched his face carefully, waiting for discomfort, judgment, or that familiar tightening I had learned to expect. Instead, he said something simple. That must have been incredibly painful. No advice, no correction, no justification, just acknowledgement. I felt something shift inside me. With Daniel, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth. I didn't feel like I was being evaluated. I didn't feel like love came with conditions. And that scared me, because chaos had taught me to mistake anxiety for passion. But I didn't run. I stayed present. I learned that peace can feel unfamiliar when you've lived in survival. Love didn't erase my past. It didn't fix me. It didn't complete me. It met me where I already stood. One night, months later, I told him everything. About the infertility, about the blame, about how I had learned to hate my own body. I braced myself. He took my hands gently and said, "Your body never failed you." I cried, not from sadness, but from relief. Because for the first time, I believed it. Whether I would become a mother someday no longer defined me. My worth was no longer tied to what I could produce, only to who I was. Today, my life looks different than the one I imagined years ago. But it feels honest. It feels grounded. It feels mine. I wake up without fear. I speak without apology. I trust my instincts again. And that, more than anything, is my victory. If there is one thing I want anyone listening to this story to understand, it's this. Never accept blame for someone else's secrets. Never allow love to require your silence. And never stay small so someone else can feel powerful. I lost years believing a lie, but I gained the rest of my life by choosing the truth. And if you are listening right now, feeling seen, feeling understood, feeling less alone, then this story did what it was meant to do. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your worth, if it helped you see yourself more clearly, please like, share, and subscribe to Tender Heart Stories, so more hearts can heal through stories like this. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you the most? Your story isn't over, and you are stronger than you think.